I grew up going out into the field with my father. I've got a lot of background. I'm obviously not a scientist, but I understand the dynamics, global dynamics to a certain extent. I understand geology, I understand weather patterns, enough to realize at this point in time that this methane issue that I think we're facing right now is one of the biggest issues of our time. And I don't feel as though enough people are aware of it. I don't feel as though governments and organizations and institutions are paying enough attention to it. And yet I feel like, again, it's one of the issues of our time. So I know you've been working on this for quite some time.
Yeah.
Can you give us a very quick overview of the Arctic methane emergency, as you would call it, and what it means to us and what potentially we can do about it in the near term?
Yes, well, the big thing about the methane is that it's going to come out eventually, and there's vast quantities of it. The carbon, and because it will be generally coming out in anaerobic conditions without oxygen, the carbon will be emitted as methane rather than carbon dioxide. Now, there's under the land permafrost, there's enough carbon to triple the quantity in the atmosphere.
Which from what I understand, would be devastating. I mean,
even if it was CO2, it'd be pretty devastating. But if it's methane, we have to think about 20-year timescale, not 100-year timescale, because the critical thing is if we can sort out this problem within the next 20 years, then we can get onto a decent path and a sustainable system.
I mean, I've seen data just in the last couple of weeks coming off of methanetracker.org, which is showing concentrations in the higher reaches of the atmosphere at almost 3,000 parts per billion, which seem like massive spikes compared to data from just even a couple of years ago. Is that what you guys are seeing?
Well, there are people saying that the methane isn't growing from the Arctic, like the Russian who came to a meeting.
Right.
But I think the evidence is that it's growing. How fast it's growing is very difficult to say. Natalia Shakova admitted that they don't have a time series, really. So they can't say. They've looked at one spot and it's grown by this much over 5 or 10 years, which would be the nice thing to know.
Right, so it's been very difficult for scientists to really put their finger on this, the quantities that have been released through natural processes in the Arctic region, and with a little bit warming, with the warming that we're seeing now, I guess it's what you're saying is it's difficult to discern what the change in the release has been over the last couple of years, and difficult to pinpoint what the cause of it would be even. So
yes, it seems that there has been an increase in the global level of since 2006, and it's gone up, it's gone shooting up. But that anomaly can probably be explained by some wetlands being, inundation in Africa, causing vast areas of wetlands which produce methane. So we can't pin that down to being Arctic, but the levels are very dramatically high in Arctic, in particular hotspots. Now, if you try and say, well, is this contributing to global warming? Yes, but very little.
So far?
A tiny bit. Now, it would have to escalate 2 or 3 orders of magnitude to get comparable to CO2.
Because there's so much CO2 in the atmosphere. You're saying it would have to compound itself by magnitudes of 3 to 4 to reach the current CO2 emissions?
2 or 3 orders of magnitude, 100 to 1,000 times.
100 to 1,000 times.
What it's emitting at the moment, because we're talking about 8 megatons per year.
Right.
Now, if that went up to 800, we'd be close to the the gigaton level.
Right.
And the gigaton level is roughly the level at which it overtakes CO2.
Right. So taking into consideration an ice-free Arctic in the next 3 to 4 years, let's say, and a 1 degree warming of the Arctic oceans, is there a pretty good likelihood that we could start seeing these gigaton releases, or do you still think that this is something that is decades away before the ocean's warm enough till we really start seeing these kind of massive methane plumes, all over the Arctic region and causing catastrophic harm to our environment?
Well, I think I distrust the IPCC process because their projections on the warming are so
Wrong.
so wrong.
Right.
Even their worst case scenario is unrealistic because it doesn't take account of what's happening in the Arctic.
Right.
And the Arctic temperature is going to go shooting up by 10 degrees or more really quite quickly. And when you're getting temperature increase like that, the permafrost will
Melt.
thaw away very, very quickly, much quicker than it is at the moment. So there is the mechanism to get...
Right. Right. It sure seems as though there is.
Yeah.
And with that 8 or 10 degrees warming that you're talking about, that would also release, I would imagine, a large portion of the methane hydrates as well, too, right? So that there is the possibility for this catastrophic runaway self-amplification happening in the Arctic and ultimately this massive methane release.
Yeah.
I'm deeply concerned about it. You obviously are as well, too.
We have no idea whether it's going to be 10, 20, 50, 100 years.
Right.
The point is, it will happen.
It will happen.
It's almost inevitable.
It's happened before, right? Didn't it happen 55 million years ago?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, when it happened 55 million years ago, there was a doubling of atmospheric CO2 concentrations in a very short period of time. And then it seems as though then this massive methane release coincided with the doubling of the CO2 concentrations. And it sounds is short period of time of 13 or 15 years. You got a pretty substantial extinction.
I have read that the CO2 warming probably increased the ocean temperature at depth by about 2 degrees, and that was enough to cause all the methane hydrate throughout the globe to be released.
Right.
And then it's self-amplifying until it's all gone.
Right.
So we don't know the timescale, but what we do know is that if we don't cool the Arctic and break the vicious cycle of warming now,
right,
we're into this warming from the Arctic, which is going to release the methane.
Right.
And it's irreversible.
Totally
So
irreversible.
once you've got Arctic meltdown, you won't be able to get the ice back.
Right.
And so the Arctic will no longer serve its function as cooling the planet.
The refrigerator of the planet.
And it controls the climate change. The climate in the northern hemisphere is controlled by having a considerable temperature differential between the equator and the Arctic. Once that differential disappears or is significantly reduced, you start getting weather systems moving in different patterns, and the jet streams changing. And this is why you're getting lots of extreme weather in the northern hemisphere, and why crops are failing. And the US has had extremes, long periods of drought and then periods of floods and so on. So
and we can expect those conditions to accelerate dramatically, I would imagine, even in the next couple of years, I would imagine we'll see.
It's very likely to have a food crisis, a major food crisis in the next few years.
Right, so coupled with the ocean acidification, just warming of the Arctic and the planet in general, the methane issue. These are all incredibly serious issues, and I feel as though they're not being taken seriously at governmental levels, and the IPCC seems to be just glazing over a lot of these very, very important issues. Is it because of the political pressure that exists on the IPCC that we're not getting real accurate information, or what's the problem with the IPCC? Because it seems as though they have good intentions, and yet it doesn't seem like we're really getting honest, accurate information. That's my opinion, but what are your thoughts about that?
It's very much out of their comfort zone. You know, they've been working on the basis that things are going to take 100 years, and that seems to pervade the thinking.
Yeah.
There are lots of procedural constraints, so that they're only allowed to take papers that are published and have been peer-reviewed,
Right.
and then you find that the papers that have the more extreme scenarios, the more scary ones, don't get published.
Right.
So there's a vicious kind of cycle of suppression
Right.
built into the procedural system
Yes.
for IPCC.
Which could be disastrous for...
and then remember, it's an intergovernmental
Right.
organisation. So what happened, I heard from this about the AR4 report, was that the scientists, the non-governmental scientists, came up with lots of things, and then the government people came in and watered everything down.
Right.
I don't know whether that's happened this time, but certainly these glaring emissions, which we've pointed out. And the Russian who was here was saying that there aren't, everything is there, you've just got to read it carefully.
Right.
And he's absolutely wrong. We have read it carefully, we read it very carefully.
Right.
And we did word searches on methane and various keywords, and it's
Not there.
It's just not there.
Right. So the IPCC, in that sense, is doing us a great disservice, because if these issues are as critical as we think they are, and they're not being addressed by the one large, international organization that's supposed to be looking at these issues, it seems as though we're going to fall way short of the actions that are necessary. All right. Are you guys importing the people?
Coming in as time.
Okay. Well, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Sorry we didn't get a chance to chat more.
Yeah. We'll be in touch.
Yes. You got a copy of the documentary that we put together, right?
Yes.
So it has my contact information on there.
Yep.
And I think we probably have it as well too. But thank you very much for your good work. I know it's difficult. When I put this documentary together, it was very difficult for me to do, because I think the consequences of inaction at this point in time are grave, and it scares me immensely to think that we as a species and as a collective don't have what it takes to pull ourselves out of this mess. But hopefully with the good work that you are doing and other organizations that you're associating with, we can wake people up and start doing what needs to be done.
Yes. There's one thing I'd like to leave you with, and the thought that if we actually do grasp the nettle and do this, it will actually be a rather exciting project.
I agree.
And everybody will get excited by actually seeing something done which works.
Imagine that, huh?
Yeah. And collaboration.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I would very much like to be a part of anything that you guys do in the future, so hopefully we can stay in contact, and it was a pleasure meeting you all here in San Francisco.
Well, thank you very much.
Guys, smile for the camera.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Sorry to keep you